Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me is my colleague, Clayton Jones. And tonight, with your help on the call-in line, we're going to discuss several issues concerning drugs and drug law. And frankly, the period since our last show has been really a pretty exciting one in terms of what's been happening in the news. It's been a very busy time. And just to give you a quick rundown, and then we'll talk more about them, I think probably the most significant thing happened a minute or two after noon yesterday, when immediately after the inauguration, Obama's staff put up the new whitehouse.gov government page. And on this page, among other things, it laid out his plans to combat HIV/AIDS. And in this, it specifically said that there would be funding for needle exchange, federal funding, and that they were taking many of the restrictions on distributing or teaching about condoms out of the federal regulations. This is a pretty massive breakthrough since Jimmy Carter did not follow through with his Surgeon General's report that needle exchange was effective, but he still didn't get funding for it. The next thing I think that was really significant this week was a minor flap in El Paso that was mishandled into a major nationwide story. The city council in El Paso passed a resolution requesting the federal government study the drug laws. If that's all that would have happened, it would have probably been a local one-day news story, but the mayor vetoed it. And then Congressman Reyes from El Paso wrote a letter that read as if it were a very thinly veiled blackmail threat that if this resolution passed over the veto, El Paso would lose all kinds of federal funding. And the result of these rather heavy-handed attempts to suppress the resolution in El Paso turned what was a minor local story into a nationwide flap, including a rather good column by nationally syndicated columnist Clarence Page. And I think here I have to send out congratulations to both the members of DPFT and to LEAP, because both of these organizations really orchestrated a pretty complete, widespread letter-writing campaign that led to several days' worth of strong letters to the editor in the El Paso paper. There have also been two local stories of significant interest. Longtime Republican District Court Judge McSpadden, joined by 15 other judges, many of which were newly elected, wrote a letter to the incoming Texas legislature recommending that the crime of possession of small amounts of drugs, including cocaine, be reduced to misdemeanors where they're now felonies. And these are the judges right on the front line. Also, the judges have decided to create a Harris County mental health court, which will attempt to deal with people that get involved with the criminal law who are suffering from some mental illness in some other way than by sending them to jail or prison. And incidentally, both the new Harris County District Attorney and Harris County Sheriff have made some steps that indicate there are going to be some rather strong changes in those offices as well. So in many ways, this has been kind of an earth-shaking couple of weeks. Clayton?
Yes, well, you talk about the officials here, the judges, wanting to reduce the penalties for minor possession, and you have Massachusetts that voted for decrim, and their officials are asking for stiffer penalties.
Well, a few of their officials are asking for it. And this I noticed in the 2 months since the November elections, both in Massachusetts, where decriminalization referendum passed by about 2/3, and in Michigan, where a medical marijuana initiative passed by the same amount. A lot of prosecutors, police officials, middle-level, non-elected officials usually, have been very resistant to the idea of changing the drug laws. And frankly, it seems to have generated a lot of public resentment about their trying to interfere with what the people are saying.
Policemen are there to enforce the laws that are made, not to dictate what laws should be or how the laws should be.
Yeah, and they act as if these laws are carved in stone somewhere and can't be changed at all.
The drug war hasn't ever worked. How do they think, like Massachusetts are recommending stiff jail prison terms for cultivating and dealing? It hasn't made a deterrent yet. What makes them think that it's all of a sudden going to become a deterrent?
Well, Einstein once said, insanity is repeating the same experiment and hoping for a different outcome. But,
well, I guess we have a whole lot of insane officials.
I started thinking some time back, and I'll probably step on some toes here, but some toes need stepping on. And we have had for 150 years groups of religious extremists, more in this country than anywhere else, that have denied the developed evolutionary thinking in the biological sciences, and particularly have resisted the inclusion of evolutionary thought in the teaching in public schools of science. And looking at it, there's really a feeling, and I think some of the people that do this have actually said that the minute you recognize or accept the idea that one little part of their belief is wrong, then the whole edifice crumbles. And the more I look at the drug warriors, the more I see the same kind of thinking. There's no logic, there's no reason behind barring medical marijuana, yet they're afraid that if that first crack appears, the whole structure is going to fall down. It's a very unreasoning religious belief type attitude that's at work here.
I mean, I always thought that we had the right to do what was best for ourselves in medicine, and there's a lot of great thoughts that are finding that cannabis is actually very beneficial to people.
Yeah.
It's helping on, cancers and all these other small ones that we know about, spasms and spinal cord injuries.
Yeah.
But they're finding that it's helping cause curing tumors.
Yeah.
That's a part of this University of Massachusetts grant that they wanted to do for that research study.
And that got shot down with
totally
the closing days of Bush. The DEA this last week gave a final denial to the University of Application's request for a license to grow. Now, I'm assuming that this will probably be appealed to the courts. I don't know what will happen there. But right now, it's back to square one administratively on that one.
Well, if anybody tries to prove that marijuana is bad, they get whatever they want to do that research.
Yeah.
But every time they do that, it always comes out that, I'm sorry, it's not bad, it's actually good.
Well, actually,
it's just mind-boggling that we have educated people that can be so dumb.
well, it's amazing. I've spent a good part of the last 15 years of my life concentrating on the research in the drug laws and their history. Yet it was only a little over a year ago that I found out that in 1974, NIDA, the National Institutes for Drug Abuse, sponsored a 3-day symposium in Atlanta on the therapeutics of cannabis. They published a 2-volume proceedings of that finding and almost immediately suppressed it. It's practically impossible to find this 2-volume work on the therapeutics of cannabis. Even in most good scholarly libraries, you won't find it. And likewise, when the story first broke, it's been 5 or 6 years ago now, about a Spanish university that found tumor suppression from marijuana. It turned out that they based their research on an American study that NIDA had kept from being published. I believe we have a caller. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I noticed the situation over the Christmas and the New Year's holidays. One of my co-workers took a week vacation, and as I spoke to him by phone, he had mentioned to me that he had used marijuana during his vacation. When he went back to work, just so happened he was selected for a random drug test. He passed the drug test. I asked him how did he do it. He said he took something to detox his body like in 1 or 2 days, and he totally passed the drug test. But I was just wondering, I was unaware that there was something that could start to do that fast.
Okay. That's a question that comes up. There are several products on the market that claim to be able to do this. None of them that I'm aware of stand up to any kind of rigorous testing to see if they really work. And if they do, in fact, reduce the presence of the metabolites in the urine, they normally leave something themselves that's detectable by the standard tests. Frankly, apparently the best thing that has worked for most people has simply been to drink lots of water and never, never, never let the tester have the first pee of the morning. Always make sure that you empty your bladder before you go to work so that that overnight concentration isn't there.
I've heard of people taking cranberry pills, concentrates, to help their system, whether it works or not, I don't know.
I don't know.
I've heard of other people drinking vinegar.
Apparently, anytime people have tried to test these to see if they work, the results aren't very promising. If they do work, it just simply seems to be that it moves a large amount of water through your body, which tends to flush that out. And one of the amazing things is that so many of the tests measure the concentration of the urine, and if it's too watery, you'll get back an inconclusive result because they think you watered things down. So it's kind of a ridiculous mess. So they're telling me it's already time to go to a break. Oh, we have a caller. I'm sorry. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I just, I had a comment.
Okay.
I mean, it's safe to talk about pot on this show, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the big deal is about it with everybody, man. I mean, for me, it motivates me, man. It gets me to work, man, and I go, I do what I got to do, and I go straight to work, and I handle up all my business, man. It's more of a get my boss out of my mind type thing. I really appreciate what you guys are doing on the air, letting people know, like, history and the background of these things. A lot of people aren't really knowledgeable to the drug policies and how these things came about.
Okay, thank you.
Listen, what you could do for us is there's a House Bill 164. It is a full medical marijuana bill that we have in our state. It's already been filed. What we can do is all get on the wagon now, start calling, writing a letter by hand, mailing it to your state representative. Demand that he co-sponsors the bill. Demand that he backs the bill. That's what we can start to do to get some movement going.
I think that's an important thing that Clayton brings up, is that the only way things can change is for them to change politically. And the only way things change politically is if voters raise hell. And the more voters who make more noise, the more likely things are to change. And on this, one thing that's of interest, Obama's transition team, right after the election, put up a webpage called change.gov, and in fact asked people, what things do you think need to be done? And on their first round of questions, I think ultimately 4 or 5 out of the top 10 had to do with marijuana law reform. It's time for us to go to a break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes and continue this discussion.
Hi, I'm Nadia Swaby with the Marijuana Policy Project. This is Marijuana 2-Minute Truths. Today's question comes to us from Chris, who asks about marijuana's effect on brain performance. Reefer Madness propaganda would have you believe that marijuana causes brain damage. But once again, concrete science disproves this. The Institute of Medicine published this conclusion in 1999. Earlier studies purporting to show structural changes in the brains of heavy marijuana users have not been replicated with more sophisticated techniques. A 2006 study published in Harm Reduction Journal reported that with regard to marijuana use, no pattern consistent with evidence of cerebral atrophy or loss of white matter integrity was detected. It is concluded that frequent cannabis use is unlikely to be neurotoxic to the normal developing adolescent brain. That said, one of the more lasting myths about marijuana is that it leads to anti-motivational or amotivational syndrome. You're probably familiar with the stereotype, the lazy abuser half asleep on his couch. In his book, Understanding Marijuana, Dr. Mitch Earlywine explained, laboratory studies of humans and primates show little support for amotivational syndrome. School performance does not vary with cannabis consumption in college students. No studies show the pervasive lethargy, dysphoria, and apathy that initial reports suggested should appear in all heavy users. Of course there are lazy people who use marijuana, just as there are lazy people who eat a lot of food or watch a lot of television. But consider a recent study that says nearly 100 million Americans have used or tried marijuana. If marijuana really leads to amotivational syndrome, where is the epidemic of American laziness? This has been your 2-Minute Truth. There is no evidence that marijuana makes you lazy or causes any structural brain damage.
Yeah, 1974. 2-volume proceedings published. And we're back. we've been discussing some of the political changes that have been occurring since the elections in November, and I thought I was being wild-eyed and optimistic, but apparently Clayton's feeling much the same way. And during the break, we were joined by our old colleague Bandounaire, and she brought Tom with her, and glad to have you all join us.
Glad to be here.
Here you've got some comments to add to what we've already been talking about.
Well, Tom's got some great projects underway, and he's got a very good-looking shirt here, so maybe we could...
Let's
Okay.
go ahead and as he was talking about
Okay.
Obama asked the American citizens, what is important to you? And actually wasn't in the top 4 or 5. It was the number one.
I said there were 4 or 5 in the top 10. But yes, number 1.
Number 3, actually, right now.
Right. So there was 3 polls. This is the 3rd poll.
Yeah.
In each of the 3 polls, the number 1 has been
Cannabis.
And
Yeah.
prohibition.
prohibition
Right.
and medical marijuana. In the 2nd poll, those questions were combined, and they said we need to do both of these things. And here in the 3rd poll, they split up again and ended up number 1 and number 3, right between committing to being a green nation and ending abstinence education, please.
Well, you know, I was concerned at first because I felt like that by letting everyone submit their own questions, it had diluted the vote and weakened the impact. But then I realized that by letting everyone have their own say, in effect what happened was that it made a bigger impact because it really had several different things in the
Right.
top 10.
I'm wondering how many of those votes were actually piggybacks of other votes, because if you look at the numbers, the number 1 with ending prohibition and legalizing or decriminalizing was 92,920 votes. So I'm wondering how many people were either A, already exposed to this, or are just realizing the implications of ending prohibition just by this poll alone. And the third, the number 3 spot was stopping raids on medical marijuana dispensaries.
Yeah.
How many people even know what a medical marijuana dispensary is, or that they even exist in certain states and are legally viable? I think it's just really interesting that 66,170 people voted for this. Is that really true? That's 66,170 people out there are willing to get on the internet and click some buttons and go make these choices and everything.
I would say there are
Talk to
that
your
many people in
legislators.
California that are concerned.
How
Yeah.
many people are
What it
turning
affects.
to that page and seeing that there and saying, well, yes, that's right, and go ahead
And click it anyways,
Yeah.
whether they may have not known about it or not. Exactly. And
Just
if you can
like-
impact those people and say, this is where you need to go next. You need to go to this website, MPP or Normal, and go
Well,
click on all these.
The thing is, the groups have been active in getting out the vote, but that too is indicative of the widespread concern and the interest of people.
What I'm seeing is much like the 2004 Scripps Howard poll here in Texas, where they discovered that yes, 3 out of 4 Texans support medical marijuana. You know that they didn't ask me, and they didn't call
Right.
you.
Yeah.
Think of who they called, and out of the blue, somebody asked you, do you think that seriously ill Texans should be allowed to use medical cannabis if it's prescribed by their doctor?
It's pretty much universal across the country. Across the country, marijuana has already been decriminalized in people's minds.
Well, let me
That's their attitude.
let me throw a different approach on this out on the table. And I've become kind of a fan of Craig Ferguson and the Late Late Show.
Oh, yes, of course.
And there's not a night that goes by without his mentioning herbal cigarettes or toking. If you look at recent movies like Pineapple Express, if you look at the success of Weeds on Showtime, I made the comment maybe 6 months ago that the people of the United States have de facto legalized marijuana. We're just waiting on the government to catch up de jure. Yeah.
Right.
And this comes back to why are the politicians insisting on still saying more penalties, more mandatories, more prisons? Because that's the quick vote. It's like political junk food.
Perhaps they feel the power
what
slipping
it
away.
is our law enforcement arm of our society has gone out of control. they think that they should be able to dictate what laws we should follow and what laws we should not follow.
Well, now that's the police, but the politicians,
Let's
I
talk
think
about
you're
the-
right. They're running primarily on fear.
Mhm.
I've heard too
We've
many
got
people
control,
say
we've got fear,
that they have talked to politicians in
and I think the
private
third element is greed.
who say, I agree with what you're saying, but I don't dare come out in public or vote for it, or I'll lose votes.
So
Correct.
fear.
Fear is still the political elephant in the room.
And I think the third element that ties it all together is, of course, greed. We look at, historically, there's been the story of, it was a conspiracy by Hearst and DuPont. And although detractors say that, well, why would DuPont not support hemp when he was having to pay so much more money at the time he was complaining about the price of paper was going up? Missing the point that DuPont owned most of the paper sources he was buying from, trees, mills.
Well, I have always discounted the conspiracy theories because I don't
Just
think
plain
they
old
explain.
I think it's just plain
Well, but
old
if you
greed.
look at
But-
if you discount conspiracy theories and look at the pure aspect of greed, yeah, county jails, prison systems, they are making a lot of money, and then state and local municipalities are making a lot of money off of
what
seized
we're seeing
assets,
again,
forfeitures.
though, is that in the economic downturn, local governments in particular, and state governments somewhat, are really feeling the pinch. Most state governments, like Texas, for instance, are constitutionally required to balance the budget. Yet, when we have a prison system that keeps coming back saying, we need X $100 million to build more prisons, the legislators now are finally looking at them and saying, you got to be kidding.
Because
Right.
we have to spend that money on schools or we won't have jobs.
Yeah.
And this is one of the technological parts of America.
And right now, we've got to spend it on health care.
Healthcare and education.
The
Yeah.
budget's just stretched too thin
And
at
that
this
means
point.
there's no money left for prisons.
Right.
Well, that is a wonderful word, because then we can stop putting people in prison for nothing but minor drug offenses.
If you look, the voters in Harris County last year turned down a request for a $200 million bond issue to build more jails.
Jails.
But they passed a bond for more schools.
Yeah. You know, the
that-
voters know what money should be used for.
But now what we're doing, we're still loading the prisons. We're sending them to Louisiana to pre-trial time.
Yeah, and
I think it's just
once
one of those
again,
structures.
though, the
Like
sheriff
FDR
has to
ended
go to
prohibition,
the...
I think it's time for Obama
Yeah.
to end
Yeah.
hemp prohibition.
Yeah. Yeah, but
You were saying?
I'm saying that right now the county sheriff still has to go to the county commission and ask for that money. And that money's just not there anymore.
Exactly.
And that's what the politicians are up against, except on the national level where they do have the flexibility of running
Inform the
deficits.
people of other options.
Okay.
All right.
And,
Well, maybe this recession downturn is going to help us out in the long run.
It sure did in 33.
because we need some alternatives, and
Yeah.
well, I've got one for Texas. Where are we here?
Okay, there you go.
Because, hey, it grows all year round in Texas. And,
What does that say? Texas hemp cultivators.
Texas
Very
hemp
nice.
Yeah.
Right.
And what's that shirt made out of?
This is actually a hemp t-shirt. Believe it or not, this is the real thing. You say, oh, hemp garments, hemp garments. No, this stuff is lovely.
And let me tell you, I felt it. This is very soft. It's a very nice quality.
Very
And you know,
durable
since
stuff.
it's made out of hemp, it's going to last a long time.
A long time. So,
So does this represent any particular organization?
no, this
or
is just wishful thinking on my part, but hey,
spread the message
we're
one
gonna-
T-shirt at a time?
I'm going to register it now, get ahead of the curve, because, you know,
Yeah, actually, there are a few places in Texas where you can grow 2 crops a year.
hey, down here I can get 3 cuts a year on an acre of hemp, and you know what an acre of hemp will get you? I mean, not even the seed. Just grow it green.
Yeah.
An acre of hemp take one cutting. That one cutting will give you 1,000 gallons of green crude that you can use instead of petroleum. A quarter of a house if you want to do portcrete. Yes, plain hemp makes concrete. Yeah. And then still have the fiber problem left over.
To make wood to build a house.
Well,
And then it
Shingles.
becomes insect-proof. You wouldn't ever have to need an
I was going to
exterminator.
say you're leaving out something else
Chipboard.
that
I need some mildew-proof chipboard. Come on, guys, please.
We live in Houston.
the hemp plant itself is naturally resistant to most of the insect pests in this country, so that it can be grown without pesticides. And for proper fiber cultivation, the plants are grown so close together, there's not really room for weeds, so it doesn't need tillage.
That's why
Well,
you
it may.
can hide your pot
Yeah.
plants in the hemp.
And that's one reason why hemp is one of the cheapest of both fiber and oil crops in terms of growing costs.
Of course, since
It looks
the
like
beach
we've got a
is
caller.
getting
Maybe they
Oh,
have a
okay.
question about
Let's
hemp.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, the argument can be made that drugs, people self-medicate sometimes for very good reasons.
Yeah.
And the price of pharmaceuticals, drugs are a good alternative, economically.
Well, just difficult to control the purity and the source, and of course the dosage. So yes, it would be a lot easier if these were above ground instead of hidden. It'd be
Yeah.
a lot less.
Right.
But also, one of the problems especially is that in dosing with psychoactive drugs, and I don't care if it's marijuana or Prozac or Xanax or Thorazine,
Right.
one of the problems is even the professional therapists have trouble coming to accurate diagnoses, and prescribing the wrong drug can cause more problems than not.
Right.
And we find that marijuana or cannabis, when it's self-prescribed, is very often the worst thing to use and makes things worse. Now, yeah, I think it should be
Yeah.
available,
I think
but let's don't tout self-medication as
Right.
a cure-all.
Since
Perhaps he
lots of
was talking
people
about-
who are using dosages
Yeah.
now find themselves using way less
Yeah.
than they used to use recreationally.
exactly. The people who need it will use it exactly for what they need it for, and not just recreational, try to get buzzed. They will use it in doses that, because that's you hit the nail on the head. Psychiatrists, but physicians in general have a very hard time establishing a dosing system, just because we have an
titrate.
antiquated system for just establishing how much pain a patient
Well,
is in.
it's not titrating as much as it is. It's very, very, very hard.
When something's
distinguish
so
between
slow acting as well.
Some of the versions of anxiety, obsession compulsion disorder, depression, and even some of the schizoid disorders. And looking at the categories of drugs that are available for these, for virtually all of those, cannabis is the wrong prescription,
Right.
yet it's the one that most self-medicators turn to. But we also have the other side of the problem. One of the most famous self-medicators in this country is Rush Limbaugh,
Oh, yeah.
who, being too chicken to do it himself, sent his maid out to score opioid painkillers on the street for him. And Rush's problem wasn't that he wanted illegal drugs. It was that he had a doctor that was afraid to prescribe and was not educated enough to prescribe
Enough.
large amounts of opioids, partially for fear of the doctor that he would be prosecuted by the DEA if he did.
Well, partly.
If had
the other
Rush
pain
been able
pills
to
than
go
do the physical therapy to correct the problem too.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. But
There's more pain relief doctors in prison today than any other kind of doctor performing his job.
yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Really? Where'd you?
Yes.
I mean, we've got a caller right now, but
Oh,
let's
there's
see
another
where that's
caller?
coming from. Let's see if they're still on the line.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, I was watching a television documentary, and I think in every state there are many advocates who use cannabis openly, but there are lots of professional people, lawyers, doctors, school teachers, pro athletes who use cannabis secretly in the closet because they're afraid to come out and be scrutinized publicly. But if all these people came out openly who know that it's really beneficial, wouldn't that make a huge difference to the politicians and to see people of status using something that's helpful and harmless?
What we need
Thank
to
you.
do is not just let the politicians see you use it. You get down and you tell your politician that it should be a normal way of life, and you put it in a short letter, handwritten, and you mail it to them, snail mail. They will look at that handwritten note, take more heed in that than 100 emails.
Especially if in it,
Just
it
normal
says, I'm a
citizen, much
voter in
less
your district.
a star, you know. Although, okay, Michael J. Fox, Drew Carey, Montel
Right.
Williams.
Right,
Mhm.
definitely.
Don't forget
And-
Willie Nelson.
Hey, hi, Willie.
Well, and then for your average professionals, there's even that Cannabis Consumers Network, where it's just average, everyday people who aren't afraid to say, look, I'm here, I use it, there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm still a very productive
yeah.
and
The
intellectually
problem
functioning person.
is,
Still making
how
that step,
can you really
Right.
pressure someone
especially for athletes.
to step up, especially if there's someone
Ricky
that
Williams.
depends upon a license to practice a profession? How can you tell them to step up and admit in public to an act that will likely land them in jail and
That's right,
probably
lose their license.
job or their license? I mean, you just
can't
can't
do that.
responsibly say, school teacher, light up and blow the smoke in your principal's
No.
face.
Right.
Now,
No,
again,
you
safety
can't.
in numbers, when
Yeah.
you come out as a professional group,
Look,
you see
Yeah.
a whole bunch
if you are employed by the state in any fashion, you are not allowed to speak up against its rules and regulations. A school teacher or anybody like that, they will lose their job.
and this is a very
Period.
specific thing. In
And I know of
Well-
a case that's right here in
Ironically, in Texas, a state employee probably has more rights along these lines than does someone working for a private employer, because the Supreme Court has ruled that in terms of public employment, that the employer is not allowed to do drug testing unless they can show that that particular job is safety related. So
Right.
although
bus drivers, truck drivers,
I think that's why they're having the whole
but the
contention
other,
about...
the other state employees cannot be tested. In private employment, where an employer is an employer at will and can fire you just because he doesn't like you, they can test anyone they want to.
as a condition of employment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's why they're having the whole contention about whether teachers should be tested or not, because is it, is the safety of the children in their hands?
Well, no.
Whereas
That's
Texas
the right question, but the
Wrong
question
state.
is deeper than this. The question is, in what way does a teacher smoking a joint at home on Monday night directly affect the safety of a child in class on Tuesday? If the school board can come out and show a direct physical safety impairment, then the school board might be able to test. But just saying, teachers are responsible for children's safety, therefore they can't have drugs,
I know
That's
the
not
whole
enough.
zero-tolerance policy that just got a teacher arrested for her own prescription medicine in Tyler.
well,
there was
that's
one right here in Houston a
one
couple
right
weeks
here in
ago.
Houston. Although I'm going to repeat the cynical lawyer's speech I've made a lot of times. The only crime that's ever really punished is stupidity. We've had 18 faculty and staff arrests in the Houston Independent School District in about 2 months. Every one of these, starting with the first one, has been spread all over the news media. It's been announced through all of the schools at staff meetings.
You got to be really dumb.
People have been told, don't bring drugs to school.
Checking the parking lots.
Yeah,
with
we're
dogs.
checking the parking lots. Hey,
Students.
Now, I have a friend
if
that's
under those circumstances you left a baggie in your car, guess whose fault it is?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, I don't think the school system should be searching, but let's don't waste a lot of sympathy on these particular individuals.
Right. So, I mean, if someone is going to have problems, it's going to affect their work.
Yeah.
Let's allow the administrators to say, hey, somebody's having a problem, let's deal with the
Right.
problem.
Right.
Instead of having just a generic fear.
But one thing, and I've noticed it answering this phone a lot and paying attention to letters to the editor across the country. What I hear all of the time is we can't mess with the drug laws because they protect our children.
And that's
How?
The
not
only
true.
argument that legislators can always fall back on. Exactly. Like, what are the children
What?
so suffering from?
It's like one of those
No.
magic phrases.
Right.
Alakazam.
There's
It's
no,
for the
you
children.
can't really
thing-
defend against that. It's like,
Do
oh, okay,
these
what can I
laws
say?
in any way keep anybody in this country from getting any substance they want to get?
Quite the opposite.
the
It's
black
Because
market
easier
is
for kids.
so flourishing today that there's an underground economy.
it's not today, Clayton.
It's
For
been going
over
on.
20 years, the government's own surveys, 80 to 85% or more of the teenagers have said marijuana is easy to get and easier to get than alcohol.
Right. Alcohol they cracked down on.
Yeah. And in the last survey, the amazing thing, more teenagers now admit to using marijuana than admit to using tobacco.
Mhm.
Tobacco is no longer cool.
Yeah.
And marijuana is probably easier to get than tobacco because you actually have to ID and go to a store. You know, your drug
And
dealer
if
on the
you,
street
well,
doesn't
you can
ID,
go back to the
so-
1920s.
Now let's go back to exactly that. You want to keep it away from children? Regulate it.
Well,
Get an
I've got a
ID.
better idea than this. I keep hearing we can't recognize medical marijuana because of the message it's into the kids. You stand up and say, hey kids, this is what your grandma smokes for cancer. That's going to encourage them to use it. We have to take another break. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Play Name That Drug by its side effects. Birth or empty, irritability, anger, loss of pleasure or interest, sleeping too much or too little, depression, trouble concentrating, suicide. Time's up. The answer, Accutane for acne. Another FDA-approved product.
This week in Drug War History, January 20th, 1997, the Lymphoma Foundation calls for the rescheduling of marijuana as a medicine and the reopening of the investigational New Drug Compassionate Access Program. January 21st, 1943, the New York Times reports that swing band leader Gene Krupa pleaded innocent to a charge that he contributed to the delinquency of a minor by asking a 17-year-old to fetch marijuana cigarettes from his hotel room for him. January 21st, 2003, Ed Rosenthal's federal trial for marijuana cultivation begins. Rosenthal was growing medically with the authorization from the city of Oakland, California,
Really?
but his
That's what I
legal
felt
team
like,
is barred by
I did a
Judge
little
Charles
research on
Breyer
it.
from informing the
And
jury
he's
of
just been on the
this.
bench so long.
Rosenthal is ultimately convicted but sentenced to 1 day. January 22nd, 1992, the California Research Advisory Panel concludes that drug prohibition
No, that's just
has
us.
a more harmful effect on society and the individual than illegal drugs. January 23rd, 1912. In The Hague, 12 nations sign a treaty restricting opium and coca production. January 24th, 2005. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-2 decision, rules that police do not violate the Fourth Amendment when they use drug-detecting dogs to locate illegal drugs in the trunks of cars during a legal traffic stop. January 25th, 1993. Based on a tip that drugs were on the premises, Police smash down the door and rush into the home of Manuel Ramirez, a retired golf course groundskeeper living in Stockton, California. Ramirez awakes, grabs a pistol, and shoots and kills one policeman before other officers kill him. No drugs are found. Network.
Know what we all have in common?
We are all adults who use marijuana responsibly.
Visit NORML.org today and learn how you can help end marijuana prohibition in 2007. Uproot the propaganda, not the plan.
We're back. Before the break, we were talking about the effect the laws had had on the availability of drugs. In 1937, when the director of the Bureau of Narcotics was asking Congress to pass the Marijuana Tax Act, he said marijuana was a narcotic that was unknown to most of the people and was used by just a few, mainly black musicians in the big cities and Mexican agricultural workers.
In fact, he said, this marijuana causes white women to crave sex with Negroes, and oh my God, that's an actual quote.
Yeah, but mainly he said nobody uses it except for these two small outlier groups. The last government figures show that well over 40% of the population of the U.S. has now tried marijuana. About 16 million of us use it at least once a month. That's how much the drug laws have suppressed it in the last 70 years.
It's definitely prevalent now that it's just not, it's gone beyond those two minority groups. But I was actually discussing this earlier at dinner, how historically the U.S. has always used the drug of choice for a certain population in order to establish laws against it in order to kick that population out. For example, when I guess the railroads were being built on the East, and then I guess the Irish were kind of finished with that, alcohol became prohibited. In the West, when railroads were being finished in the West. Now, I may be confusing this a little bit, but after the railroads were finished in the West, then opium was prohibited to kind of prevent the Chinese. And then when Mexican immigrants were kind of coming through Texas and California, and of course, there's so many historic and horrible
the first Texas laws were early 1900s.
Here's the irony.
Preceding the federal laws, yes.
We started out tonight discussing the El Paso City Council, asking to rethink the laws.
The worm has
The El
turned.
Paso City Council in either 1912 or 1913 passed a city ordinance that was the first law in the United States banning the possession of marijuana.
Thank you.
So El Paso started it. El Paso now wants to end it.
Yeah, these discriminatory tactics of the U.S., it's supposed to be such
Look at what they're doing on the West Coast. They're saying that the Mexicans are coming up from Mexico, running these big farms on the federal lands, and they're making things so terrible. They're a real problem. But they're not talking about all the other murders that happens from illegal immigrants, or robberies, or drunk drivings. I mean, there's other terrible crimes that people do.
What they're overlooking here is that in the 1920s, in New York and Chicago both, and we don't have good records anywhere else, the alcohol gangs were paying families living in low-rent tenements $5 a week or so to run an illegal still in their bathroom. And both cities were plagued for that 10 years with all kinds of fires and explosions and the problem they caused.
From these
in South America, right now, the illegal cocaine-producing laboratories are dumping tons of acids and petroleum-based solvents in the streams and strip mining the forest. Methamphetamine labs that are run illegally cause all sorts of toxic waste.
Blowing up trailer parks across the South.
Every one of these same chemicals, when produced by a legitimate, regulated, licensed manufacturer, is done safely and in ways that protect the environment. Cocaine, when made for the pharmaceutical market, is clean. Methamphetamine, when it was the largest selling prescription drug in the 50s and 60s, was clean and cost less than $1 for 1,000 pills. Marijuana, when it was grown on hemp plantations, was a clean crop. It's the illegality that does the damage, not the product.
Again.
Right.
Bandu, you wanted to tell us about the DPFT board meeting that's coming up.
Definitely. If you guys want to discuss more of these issues, if you want to find out how you can get involved, how you can help, and how one of the oldest and most prevalent drug policy reform organizations in Texas, what they've been up to for the last year, then please come join us Thursday, January 29th, which will be 1 week and 1 day from today. It's Cafe Express, which is 1422 West Gray Street. I think that's between Waugh and Montrose.
It's between
on
Montrose
Gray.
and Shepherd, at least, on the north side of the street.
Yeah. It's right between Waugh
It's
and Montrose.
right across the street from the public center.
Right, where that district went to vote. So, or early vote at least. Yeah, and it'll be 7:30 if you want to grab dinner or anything like that. That's 6:30, but it's the annual DPFT board meeting where they'll be discussing what happened in 2008 and what we can do in 2009. So we'd love to see you guys out there. I think briefly, Clayton, you mentioned House Bill 164, which is up this year.
Yeah, House Bill 164 was put in by Texas Coalition for Compassionate Care.
Okay.
We've got it in the House. Steve is going to come down in a couple of weeks and be on the program with us.
Steve.
So it's a thing that we need people now calling, writing their representatives.
Does anyone know when that's going to go up for vote, or if that's in committee, where that stands right now?
No,
It
I
hasn't
don't.
even been assigned to committee.
Okay.
Remember, the legislature has
They just
140 days.
Right, and they just
130
started.
of those they screw around, and then in 10 they do things.
In 10, they get rid of all the bills that might actually matter. Pass what
Our problem last year, of course,
Debbie Riddle.
was that we had a committee chairman that on her own hook prevented the bill from even coming up for committee discussion. Be interesting to see what the new speaker does in terms of committee chairs.
Or which committee they put it in.
Yeah, even which committee it goes to. Now, we're about to run out of time again. And I don't know whether, I do know I want to tell you to pull on the hip boots, make sure the caulking in your boat is good and watertight. I'm not sure which metaphor is better, but as far as I'm concerned, we can either say that the floodgates have started to open or that the cracks in the dam are really starting to crumble.
I think that's a good metaphor.
I think especially if we jump on it now, this is the year for reform, both locally and nationwide.
Now, for
And as they've
Texas,
been
it's
saying,
still going to be trench warfare for a long time. So, guys,
remember the
take part.
The most important words in our history, in our government, and our thinking are those three little words, we the people. And unless you make the voice of we the people heard in the Houston City Council, the Harris Commissioner's Court, the state legislature in Austin, and that big black hole of rationality in Washington, D.C., unless you make yourself heard there, nothing happens. The monkey's on your back, friends, and on mine. But together we can do it. Anybody else want to jump on now?
No, you've got it.
One drop of rain will not get you wet. But how many drops of rain did it take to make the ocean? Take part. Do your part. And if you say, well, what can I do? Well, how much did you spend for your last recreational excursion? Send that to somebody who cares, like these guys right here, MPP or normal, because you know it's going to pay off. Thank you very much.
And remember, for those of you who don't see us live and don't have a chance to call in and participate, we now have our email box. You can email the show at dcp@dfpt.org as it shows on the screen.
dpft.org. It's okay. They've got it on the on the screen
and
there.
it's forwarded directly to me. I promise to read all of them within at most a day or two, and to answer most of them relatively promptly.
You can even answer them on the show. It looks like we've got a few minutes left, so why don't we take this last caller?
Speaking of answering.
Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, I like to use President Obama's campaign slogan. I think it's going to do a very good job. And as far as decriminalizing marijuana, I'd like to use his slogan, yes, we can, and it's time for change.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yes, we can. Yes, we
I
will.
think yes, we can is right.
If you know, Mr. President Obama, back in last April, first week of April, said that he would propose legislation to allow all states to have medical marijuana, and he was going to propose legislation for the doctor-assisted suicide.
Okay. Yeah.
To help
Excellent.
people check out quickly rather than...
And there are now at least 2 lawsuits that have begun the long, slow process
Yes.
of trying a new constitutional theory, attacking the classification of marijuana law. It's one that's based upon recognizing the state's rights to determine what is the practice of medicine. And I frankly think that this is probably the idea that's got the best chance of any.
Yes.
I hope when we come back in 2 weeks, I have even more reason to be optimistic. But if I do, it's going to be because all of you made it happen. This is not the time to slack off. This is the time to work harder. We're in the red zone. Can we push it over the goal line? I don't know, but you can tell me. So
You can certainly tell your legislators exactly what you think.
And remember, they've all got a home office as well as their Austin office.
Oh, yeah.
And you can
Drop
go see
by.
them in person.
Wear your tie.
With a nice embellished hemp leaves.
Well, not this, but, I mean, wear a tie.
Dress appropriately.
Thank you. Dress nice. Go there like you mean business. It's a business office, and we want them to take us seriously because, I'm sorry, it was funny when we were kids. We're not kids anymore, and we're serious.
And be polite with them, but firm. Go into that office not as a supplicant, but as the boss.
Because you are.
Treat him politely, but let him know you're in charge and you're giving him directions, not asking for favors. You hired him, you can fire him.
And if he doesn't do what you would like him to do, don't vote for him next time.
Right.
Say it.
Exactly.
Let the ballot box speak your words.
This is the only time in my life I have ever advocated being a single issue voter. But I think for the next election or two, it's probably crucial enough that as a temporary tactic, being a single issue voter on this issue is important.
Yes.
So keep the word moving. We'll see you in 2 more weeks. If we don't see you at the DPFT meeting next Thursday at 7 o'clock, 7:30.
Thank you.
The present policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat.
We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether marijuana or any other substance has a medical benefit.
The fact that marijuana is the less dangerous drug.
We're going full-blown into a program that has failed and failed every other time we've tried it. Please point out one success in 30 years of an eradication program that has stopped drugs from coming in this country. Point out one success, because